Welcome to the Purple Warriors podcast. I'm Ali Sugars, your host, and thank you so much for joining me. This podcast is about raising awareness for domestic abuse by allowing survivors to share their own stories and journeys to recovery. It's also about assisting fellow survivors to give you practical yet powerful information that will help you on the road to your recovery. I hope you enjoy the show. A few weeks ago, I shared my personal DV survival story with you, and I wanted to delve a little bit deeper into that today and talk about the after effects mentally of living in a DV situation. In particular, living with depression and anxiety. Now, my main purpose for this episode is to help those suffering to realise that it is an ongoing process to recovery, and also to maybe educate people who might be living with someone with a mental illness how to understand what may be happening in those people's minds that they may not necessarily be able to articulate for themselves. As I mentioned in episode 2, I suffered from postnatal depression after the birth of both my children. And, I couldn't believe that I would be so depressed after giving birth to such amazing creatures and human beings that I loved so much. My children were born 13 months apart, so it was almost like raising twins. You changed one nappy, you changed the other. You fed one, you fed the other. One went off to school, the other one went off to school, etc., etc. You get the message. But the thing that sticks in my mind mostly is that when I got pregnant with my daughter, my body, mind, and my hormones hadn't completely settled down from having my son. Therefore, when she came along, it wasn't not really a surprise to me that I ended up on medication for a second time for postnatal depression. I also have a family history of mental illness. I have family members with bipolar, and many who have suffered all kinds of depression and anxiety and other mental illnesses. So you can almost say that, I have a predisposition for it. I also have the type of personality that tends to take negative comments straight to heart. So there's all that. And then there was living with severe emotional abuse. This all became much more severe when my children were born. Also, as mentioned in episode 2, we had lots of life stresses at a very, very young age. So personally, there were 2 young children, and they were babies, postnatal depression, and being told constantly in every way possible that I was a complete failure in life. There were many times when all I wanted to do was just take the kids and escape the house from the constant picking, the niggling at what I hadn't done right. All I wanted to do was escape. But the spark plugs or whatever it was that made the car go were taken out of the car and hidden, so I couldn't go anywhere. So I was literally trapped where I had no choice but to hear those insults that were directed at me. There were many days when I was yelled at for everything and told I was totally useless. And these sessions, they went on for hours at a time. Even when I tried my absolute hardest to make the best effort I could, it wasn't anywhere near good enough for the increasingly high and impossible standards expected of me. And then there were the days where I simply found it hard to move, to get out of bed, to be a mother, to keep that clean and tidy house, to satisfy those unrealistic expectations. And of course, there were the days when I just wanted to end it all and be done with everything. Then I left the marriage. And I honestly thought, as well as did many other people in my life, that would be it. Everything would be okay now. I thought I could simply recreate my life and everything would be perfect. But now here comes the ugly truth. 25 odd years later, I am still dealing with the after effects of that relationship and what it did to me mentally. The difference is that over those years, I have been able to develop my little personal brand of self-help techniques that, they enable me to deal with the depression when it rears its ugly head, and it is ugly. When I first left, and I'm quite sure this is the case for most, if not all people leaving a DV situation, it was so very difficult to get my head together. There were so many things to consider and organise. Things like housing, transport, furniture, finances, schooling, the children's well-being. The last thing I was thinking about was myself. I was just concentrating on all the practical things in life. Then there was the loss of friends who promised that they would be there to support me through it all, but they left me high and dry for whatever reason that was. And, I'm assuming that it was most likely simply because they didn't understand. In truth, I didn't want to admit the effect all this was having on me. I would do what I had to. I would deal what I had to deal with. Then when it got dark at night, I would close the curtains and just say, "That's enough today, world." It would just be me and the kids in our own little space. I was literally hibernating from life. I didn't want to deal with it, only the things that I absolutely had to deal with. But even getting into the car to take the kids to school in the morning was a struggle. I just wanted to come home and be alone, but I didn't want to think. That probably makes absolutely no sense to you, but I would come home and find all the distractions that I could within the home throughout the day. I would do craft, I would do housework, even though I hated it. I would escape reality by watching DVDs for hours at a time. I listened to music, I read fiction novels, anything that meant that I didn't have to think about my life. I knew it had gotten to a point, though, when I had to go back to the doctor, and once again I was put on antidepressants for severe depression. And you know what? I have absolutely no shame in sharing that with you. These medications are available for a reason. And I am so grateful that they were there to help me at that time. I also remember the doctor saying to me that because I had had several severe bouts of depression, that I would be on that medication for the rest of my life. Now, I may be predisposed to depression, but I have a bit of a stubborn side. You ask my family, they'll probably tell you I have a lot of a stubborn side. But my immediate thought when the doctor said that was, "I don't think so, Doc." I didn't say it to him out loud. I just made a promise to myself then and there that it wasn't going to be the case. I was not going to be on that medication for the rest of my life. And I'm happy to say that I'm not on that medication now. But thinking back over it now, I ask how I got through it. And the only answer I can give is literally one step at a time. One day at a time. Thankfully, with the help of a very, very supportive family, and in particular my mum was my absolute rock. So thank you, Mum. However, one vice I did develop was a liking to alcohol. And it did become a vice for me. Now, I'm not going to say that I became an alcoholic, but many a time I did use it as an escape. And if I let myself, I still have a tendency to do it now. If I let myself. Now, let me take you to a couple of short years ago. I had an extremely stressful situation in the workplace that led to the need for me to go off on stress leave. And unfortunately, while I can't go into details here for legal reasons, I can tell you that this was because of harassment and abuse within the workplace. And it led me, for the first time, to experience severe anxiety. I was throwing up pretty much all day, on the way to work, at work, and on the way home from work. I was often unable to breathe. or I just had difficulty breathing. I was hyperventilating when thinking about the workplace. This was even at home at night. I constantly felt nauseous, and I found it difficult to form a sentence when someone asked me a question at work. It was really embarrassing. One weekend, I was sitting at home and I was just contemplating what was happening at work. And I ended up being rushed to hospital in an ambulance thinking that I was having a heart attack, when actually what I was experiencing was a severe anxiety attack. No one explained to me what was happening. Not the doctor, not the ambos. I was simply sent home from hospital and told that my heart was okay, which is great. But I didn't understand why that had happened to me. So until a friend of mine who had also experienced similar things to me, she said, "Ali, I think you have anxiety." And she was right. And although I was like, oh crap, not another thing that I have to deal with, I was also kind of relieved because there was a reason for what was happening to me, all these physical symptoms. And I have to admit that throughout this time, I was also drinking very heavily, and I don't have any doubt that that did exacerbate my symptoms. I wasn't eating properly because really, I just couldn't be bothered. When I was off on stress leave, once again, I found myself unable to move and often just lying on the couch for hours at a time in a daze, just wishing the day away. The only difference was that now my children were adults, I actually couldn't use them as a trigger to force myself to get up and move again because I didn't have to go pick them up from school. I actually didn't have anything to force myself off the couch. One specific day, I remember that I was on my way out of the house, probably to go to a work cover appointment of some sort, and a car nearly hit me fair and square in the driver's side door. It would have killed me. And a thought went through my head. It would have been easier if you just hit me and finished the job, mate. And right then and there, I knew that I had to get help once again for mental illness. So I went to the Beyond Blue website. I educated myself on the symptoms that I was experiencing. I went to my doctor. I got a mental health plan and I started seeing a psychologist. And I'm just going to say here, thank God for our medical system in Australia, because once again, it actually saved my life. And I know people have a go about the Medicare system, but if things like this weren't available to us, I don't know what would happen to a lot of people out there who suffer from similar symptoms or the same symptoms to what I was. So I appreciate our Australian medical system. Now, in the few short years since that incident that I was talking about, I have stopped drinking heavily. I try to eat better and stick to a reasonably healthy diet. I pray and I meditate and I use all kinds of those techniques that I was talking about before that I know help me generally to stay on top of my moods. But there are still times, for whatever reason, I have those times of depression where I need to seriously concentrate on not allowing myself or my thoughts to go back to those dark times. And last week, as I record this, was one of those weeks, which in truth is what has led me to talk about this with you today. So I am living proof that this is a process. It does get better, and you can and you will get through it. Now, if you're listening to this and you're wondering, do I have a depression or anxiety? I would encourage you to go to the Beyond Blue website, beyondblue.org.au. There's a checklist on there that you can do to see if you are at risk or you may have depression or anxiety. There's a helpline that you can call if you need to, and there is a lot of information about depression and anxiety and mental illness. It's a really, really handy website to go to. There are, and you'll see this on the website, but there are several different types of depression, and they can be hereditary, they can be brought on by life's events, our personality types, hormones, and even drug and alcohol abuse, a lot of which I have talked about today. So I want to say though, please don't be ashamed if this is you. There is so much help out there, and from experience, I can tell you that reaching out and getting this help really does work, and it does help you. Now, on the other side, if you know someone that you know or suspect has a mental illness, or they need assistance in any way, maybe just start a conversation with them to see how you can support them. Often just talking about what we're experiencing with someone can help more than you possibly know. Now, you may not necessarily understand what they're going through, and you know what? They might not know either. But acknowledging it and helping them to get the help they need can be a lifeline in itself. So thank you for listening to another part of my story today. And once again, if this helps just one person in their recovery, then great. But I really do hope that it speaks to so many more people. So until next time, I hope you enjoyed today's show, and thanks for listening. If you would like to share your story of survival, or you have a topic you would like to hear about on the program, reach out to me via email, welcome@themotivationmama.com, or find me, The Motivation Mama, on Instagram or Facebook. And don't forget, the greatest project that you will ever work on is you. Happy day, beautiful.